Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw God sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of God's robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above God. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The whole earth is full of God's glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen God, the God of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of God saying, Whom shall I send and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I. Send me. And God said, Go and say to this people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull, and stop their ears and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, God? And God said, Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until God sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if 1/10 part remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains, standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. Today we're finishing our series called Call Me Maybe, and throughout this series we've taken a look at different call stories, like we've said earlier, and how all of these people have journeyed alongside God and figured out this call. We talked about this rich man and Bartimaeus, this man who had very little. We talked about Samuel and Jonah, who ran from the call. We talked about Simon Peter last week on the boat, and then through all of this we've asked ourselves, how is God calling us right now? How are we being called in this story? We even heard from our journeyers. We heard from Pastor Gail, and we heard from Nathalie at one point. And it's been a wonderful time to get to learn how are other people called, how are we called, and exploring all that we've done in communities these last several weeks. But today is our last day of the Call Me Maybe series. So I wanted to share a little bit more about a piece of my call story that was really dear to my heart, and I may have told some of you before. But as I've said before, I felt called to ministry early in high school, and with the help of my pastor at the time, I got opportunities to try on what it meant to be a pastor. I did like pulpit supply, where I preached for 5 minutes, and I have no idea what I said. It probably was something I would cringe at now. But he put me on committees and all of this, and he helped me shape myself and my calling early on, and he helped me see what ministry really can look like in all these varied ways. He did tell me one thing that I struggled with. He said that if you're going to be a pastor, you're going to have to get comfortable with death. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I'm comfortable with death. At that point, I hadn't experienced a lot of death in my life. My grandparents had died, but I was young enough that it wasn't this like life-shattering thing. And so when he told me that, I was like, this is the thing that'll break me. This is the thing I can't do. God, I'm not going to deal with death. I can't do that. But as Joe often reminds me, saying that this is not my one thing makes God go, I think we're going to work on this together. And that happened, of course.
Don't ask for patience.
Yeah, don't ask for patience, because I know we need to test that. Yes, definitely. Yeah. And so there was one day when it was after church on a Sunday, my pastor told my dad that there was a man from our church who was dying from cancer, and he could use a visit. And my dad looked at me and he said, "We got to go and do this. If you want to know what it's like to be a pastor, this is part of the role. This is something you'll have to do." And I remember my stomach just like cinching up, and I was terrified. And so that's what we did. We went to this man's house that day, and I remember just thinking, like, God, I can't do this. This is terrifying to me. I don't know what to do. But we went to this man's house, my dad and I, and we met with him and his wife. Their names were Gay and Gail, which we have Mary and Gary now. We have Gay and Gail. And to this day, I can't tell you who was Gay and who was Gail, which is awful. I should know which one was which. But the man who was dying from cancer, he had personally chosen to stop treatments himself because they weren't working, and he knew that they were just costing his family a lot of money. He wanted to die happy, and he didn't want to put them through this burden, and he was ready to die. And so on that Sunday afternoon, I remember I didn't say a word. I just sat there and listened to my dad ask all these questions about this man's life, a lot about his faith, his family, his worldview. And I was just astonished at how firm of a faith this man had. This dying man had such a firm faith. And it was so overwhelming for me that it terrified me. I was like, how can he be okay with death? That's the one thing that I can't do. I don't understand. How is he okay with this? So after several hours of me sitting in silence, listening to my dad and all the questions and the answers, me and my dad left, and as soon as we got in the car, I just broke down. I held all of that tension in, and I just got to the car and just wept. I just felt overwhelmed. But when I hear stories like the one we read today, I think of this moment and this man who had this radical faith in the face of impending death. He knew that there was something beyond it. But it shook me to my core, it changed me, and it became something I became very passionate about, and did a lot of stuff with hospice and seminary, and really got passionate about that. And so it became a part of my call story that I didn't expect. But I kept wondering, how could this man hold on to hope in such dark times? But I remember leaving thinking, I want to be like this guy. I want to know I'll have what he's having. That was kind of what I had. Even though I was scared of it, I wanted to know. And so our story today, it's a wonderful story if you just take this sun part here. It's really beautiful. You can put it in a song. It's great. So at first glance, it's awesome. This man has this vision of God, and he's cleansed by this angelic creature. But the story doesn't end where we left off in our reading today, or in our singing today. It actually continues with a bit of a dark turn, but let's recap what's happened. Isaiah receives a vision of God in the temple, and it's this grand vision, and God's robe fills the entire temple, and there's these winged flying creatures that are all about, and each of them has 6 wings, and 2 cover their face, which is a reminder of the majesty of God. You couldn't look on the image of God, and so they were hiding their face. They also had 2 wings that hid their feet. In Scripture, feet is anything below the belt. I won't explain that. But this is their most vulnerable parts. So this is a sense of humility, a sign of respect. And so they're covering a lot of their body, but with 2 wings, they're flying. It's a fascinating thing, this overwhelming view of God, this huge throne and these angelic creatures flying around. These angels, or whatever we want to call them, they call them here seraphs, or seraphim in the Hebrew for multiple of them. And then they start singing this song, this holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of God's glory. And then at this point, the thresholds, it says, start shaking. The temple shakes with this news. And smoke fills the room, and it sounds kind of like a modern-day rock concert. Makes me think maybe James Taylor, that Vicky went, maybe it was like that. Or I even thought those big mega churches that have the lights and the smoke and all, it felt crazy. It felt cool. Yeah, we need a smoke machine. We got candles. That's the lighting we got today, which is fun. But Isaiah is completely overtaken, kind of like I was with that man. He's overtaken by this wonderful vision of God and the seraphim, and he says to God, and I love this, "Woe is me, I am undone. I have unclean lips, and I live amongst people with unclean lips." Note that he starts with humility first, and this is kind of typical in these call stories for prophets, and this even happened last week with Simon Peter, who, when he's called by Jesus to leave the boat and follow, he falls to his knees before he can do that. And so it starts with this sign of humility. Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. I'm not the guy you can use. And I'm not a part of the people you can even use, God. But then Isaiah says, but I have seen God with my own eyes. And that's important because even the seraphim couldn't even look upon God. So something is special about this Isaiah guy, that he gets a chance to look at God with his own eyes. Even Moses couldn't look at God. It had to just be in passing, and it was this bright, blinding light. And we even know, like Saul, Paul, he sees God in a blinding light and can't see and loses his vision. So it's crazy that he can see God. But then this angelic creature flies over, hearing that he feels that he's of unclean lips, that he's not worthy. This seraphim comes over to Isaiah, and he takes a coal, and he touches Isaiah's lips with this burning coal. And we know it's hot because he had to use tongs to pick it up and take it from the altar. Ouch, right? Like that. I don't know if I want to be called like getting a burning coal to my lips, but that's what he gets. And he tells him, now that this has touched your lips, you can turn away from your guilt. Your sins are covered over. This coal, or this fire, cleanses Isaiah from all that Isaiah thought kept him from God. But we know that fire is good for cleansing and can do these things, but we also know the dangers of it. Look at the wildfires going on all around us. We know that fire can be dangerous, and so it's dangerous that this seraphim comes and touches him with this coal. But for some reason, it cleanses something in him, and it changes him forever. And in this moment, he's been turned over, as it says in the Hebrew. He's been made anew. This coal that was originally meant for this offering to God has been taken and used upon Isaiah so that his life can become an offering, just like this burnt offering, to be given up completely, to burn away completely. And then God says, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Note that us here is important. It's a heavenly host. It's not just one single God. It's this whole community, which I really like this idea that God's not in it alone either. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And then Isaiah says, and this is something we've heard in other call stories, here I am, send me. And I love how sweet of it is it for God to ask, who should I send? I wonder who's going to be calling this man. And how sweet is it that Isaiah said, call me, I'll do it. Pick me, here I am, send me. But if we keep reading this, if we stop right here, I think a lot of people stop the story right there. Even in commentaries that talk about this, they'll stop right at that point where this man's called, he's cleansed, it's great. And I think that's an unfortunate thing to do because we miss out what he's called to do. Because we get this picture of this man, this prophet called by God, cleansed by this holy fire, prepared for this call. Wonderful story, right? But what happens when we keep reading? What is he called to do? And that's where the fire theme comes in today, this burning theme. So we have to note some little context before I get too far into that, is that it starts by saying this happened when King Uzziah died. And so this is a point in Israel's history that's kind of a pivotal moment. It's kind of the mark of the end of Judah, which was a part of Israel's independence. The Assyrians were kind of on the up and coming, and they were about to take them over, and the Israelites are in grave danger at this moment. It's a scary time for them, and as history teaches us, the Israelites will soon actually be carried off into exile, and it's the first of several exiles that they face in different waves of that. And so the people are about to lose everything they hold so dear. And this is when Isaiah is being called in the midst of all of this terrifying stuff going on. Isaiah is being offered up, this holy sacrifice, right? Like the coal on his lips. Isaiah is also going to be burned in this. It's going to be hard. So what a fun call story to end on. We're doing such a hard call like this. But God tells Isaiah that this is what his call is, to go and tell all the people that they will hear but not understand. They will see but not know. And then he says, make fat their hearts, make their ears heavy, smear over their eyes, blind them, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and with their hearts understand and return to heal. These all sound like awful things to tell anyone. These aren't fun things to hear. They're not going to be able to understand or know or hear or see, or else they might get a chance to return and heal. That doesn't make sense, right? What the heck does this call even mean? You want Isaiah to tell the people that they have no chance at safety, at surviving? Isaiah seems to be facing some burning heat that will rival this little coal placed on his lips whenever he faces the people. I think that's where the real heat is going to come for him. Isaiah will have to offer up his life to a people that won't understand what he's saying and won't understand what he's doing, can't understand, they'll be completely blinded to what he's doing with the help of God. And so Isaiah, with a bit of trepidation in his voice, asks God, "How long?" And God says, "Till everything is laid to waste. Till every single bit is burned away." But not every single bit, right? There's a single stump that will remain. When everything burns to the ground, there is this single stump. And this stump of a tree will be the holy seed from which a new day will begin. See, God wasn't scared of losing everything in this story, which I think is important when we're looking at the church isn't growing, or what's growing, what's dying off. God didn't care. God was ready to let things die off in this story. In fact, it seemed that a lot of lives were going to be put on the line, unfortunately. And it seems that the people of Judah or Israel were about to become an offering themselves alongside Isaiah and this little piece of coal. It seemed that God wanted things to be cleared away before this new thing could begin. And as Bible scholars as we are all here right now, we should understand that this story was written by a people not pre-exile, it was after they were already in exile. A people who had already lost everything and were writing their history down. A people that were just trying to make sense of a senseless act of destruction, all this pain and death and suffering all around them. So when we read this, we should see how the story reveals to us a people who thought God needed everything to be destroyed. But we also learn that it's a people who didn't end the story with destruction. They put this little clause in right at the end. They knew how this devastating attack had happened with the Assyrians, and they knew death personally. They probably had lost people they loved. They had lost their homes and everything. They were sent into exile. But they wrote down in this story that one stump would remain. And they called this stump a holy seed. And this was something, this piece that could not be burned away by any coal or warring nation. It was a seed that held the future in its tiny little size. Just this tiny little bit of hope is all they and Isaiah had to hold on to. Because they could not understand or hear or see what was going on. How could they? It's like explaining, how do we know what's going on right now? In times like these, when COVID is raging yet again through another wave, and wars are ongoing, and it seems that there's wildfires, and the news keeps telling us of the next mass shooting that's happened. In these times, I think about that man dying from cancer, and how he also held on to that tiny piece of hope. Knowing that death was coming so soon, yet still seeing life beyond it. And I remember this being an earth-shattering hope that once scared me, but it now gives me hope myself. That one day we really will overcome all of this. That destruction isn't the final word. Something changes in us when we have this tiny seed of hope. When everything else is burned away, all the mess, whatever it is, when all of that is gone, this tiny seed of hope remains. So what Isaiah is calling us to teaches us that this seed of hope can give us the courage to speak against evil and wrongdoings, even when we have no understanding of what's going on, even if we're on the eve of destruction, like the song said earlier. Isaiah shows us of these contradictions of the Christian faith, that even in destruction, we are built back up again, that in times of hopelessness, that somehow hope, this little seed, is still alive, that in times of anger, love somehow still persists in the midst of it, and that even the weakest of all of us will one day be made strong again. And this right here is the gospel, right? This is what gospel means, the good news, that despite the crap and pain of the world, that something transcends all of it, and we get to take part in that we get to come alongside that healing and that hope. And God is still calling us to serve as prophets too, just like Isaiah, to speak out about this holy seed, this bit of hope in a world that won't believe it, in a world that thinks everything is doom and gloom, that we have something to hold on to. In a world that feels like it's falling apart, we have something. And I think we can preach the story of hope in the midst of destruction to those around us, even if we are blinded, even if we don't fully understand what it means ourselves. And I think that's the mystery of the Christian faith, is that we hold on to this even if we don't completely get it. So may we face the world we live in today with this good news in our back pocket, knowing that when all else is gone, that a small seed will truly remain. And let us hope that we can nurture this holy seed in a way that changes the world and changes us, that turns us away from the pain and suffering and destruction into new life. For we're all being called. Here we are, God. Send us. Amen.
Amen. Well, as we go this week into the world, remember, the base calling is to be Christ to everyone that you come across. Don't let your fears of what you should or should not do keep you from being the creation that God created. Know that once the fire has come and gone, that what is left is the perfect, imperfect human being that we are. So the blessing today is, no matter what is in your life this week, no matter what you will experience, no matter what comes your way, may you experience the peace that passes all understanding. Go in peace.
Amen.